You found us through fly fishing. You'll stay for our passion and the community. Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Podcast.
Yeah, but he doesn't get it. How come fly fishermen don't get it?
You only haul with the short power snap.
Look for where people walk and the insides of bends and hunt those.
The roof blew off and the interior walls got sucked out. And the trees are just coming up. And I mean, he's clearly not going to clear the trees.
It is not a fly fishing story. It's a story about me trying to understand my brother through fly fishing.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Today's episode is sponsored by Eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton Territory, Idaho's most renowned zone for fly fishing, from the Henry's Fork to the South Fork of the Snake, and all the high alpine lakes and streams in between. Yellowstone Teton Territory provides anglers and other outdoor enthusiasts with all the information they need to plan their next big trip. You can visit wetflyswing.com/Teton right now to get the full list of outfitters, lodges, fly shops, and all kinds of inspiration to get you started on your next trip to Eastern Idaho. That's Teton, T-E-T-O-N, wetflyswing.com/Teton. We've been waiting for you. Follow our guests, follow us on Instagram, and share this episode and the love if you enjoy this podcast. And we are live in 3, 2, 1. Phil Roy back on again. I think, Phil, as our reigning champion, you have, I don't think I have to guess now, you've had more podcasts than anybody else so far. Are you still okay with the podcasting?
Yeah, I love it. It's an honor to have that title.
Yeah.
It wasn't something I was a subversive goal of mine. It just always enjoy talking with you.
Nice. Well, of course, you have the Littoral Zone, which is a popular podcast that we have that's in the network, and people are loving the Stillwater stuff. So today, I think what we're going to dig into is a little bit of a quick update, and we really want to give a shout out to this event we have going down to one of the famous parts of Stillwater areas in the Henry's Lake area. So we're going to talk about that today, maybe some tactics, maybe some upper level techniques that people can think about. But before we jump into it, let's take it back real quick. How have things been going? You've been out there, you've been busy. It seems like you're flying all over the North America. How's that been going?
It has been busy. Typically for me, spring and now heading into the fall season are my busiest times of the year with the Stillwater schools I do, destination schools, those kind of things. Early on in the year, it's all about fly fishing shows and outdoor shows and things like that. So I get a little bit of a break in August, and I think I've got a little bit of a break in November before heading off to Argentina to go chase those giant rainbows in Jurassic Park. And this time on my trip to Argentina, I've got a week prior that I managed to put together with a group, and we're going to go chase Golden Dorado for the first time. So,
oh wow,
I'm excited about that. No chironomids, obviously.
Yeah.
No small things, just big streamers for a fish that likes to kill other fish.
You're doing it. All right, you want to give? Where are you heading? Are you heading up to a lodge or?
Yeah, well, I'm heading to the lodge I do my hosted trips to Argentina with, Estancia Laguna Verde. The owner of that lodge, Beto, also owns Golden Dorado River Cruisers. So this is a refurbished houseboat, beautiful, luxurious. So you cruise up and down the Parana River. I love how I said river there.
Yeah, that was good. Was that French? Was that French?
No, I went back to my English roots somehow.
Oh,
wow.
Right.
Anyway, so up and down the Parana River, following the Golden Dorado, because the bait fish they feed on, and their name escapes me right now, they move up and down with it. So you're in this houseboat as your home base, and then you're in, motorized boat skiffs with 60-horse Yamahas, I think, scooting around the river, chasing these Golden Dorado and big streamers and poppers and things like that. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to it being warm too. So
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. That's so cool you're doing that. And I've heard about some of those trips out there with the boats. So you guys are actually going to be staying on this houseboat, like sleeping on the water.
Yeah, it's pretty luxurious because Beto and his team that runs both lodges, they do everything top drawer. So it's beautiful accommodation, first-class food. As I jokingly say, the magic wine cabinet that seems to deplete every night and resupply itself overnight. So,
Right.
Yeah. Some very, very good Malbecs down there.
Right. So you're doing the trip. So you have the Jurassic Lake trip you've done, and then the week
Yeah.
before. How far are those places apart?
Well, you go to Buenos Aires, and then I believe it's about a 4.5, 5 hour drive to the Golden Dorado River Cruiser. So we'll do that for 4.5 days, drive back to Buenos Aires, have a day in Buenos Aires, and then we fly down to El Calafate, which is about 3 hours south flight from Buenos Aires, land there, spend the night there, and then we're picked up early on the Saturday morning by a little bus, and then we're driven up Highway 40 in Patagonia, about 5 hours, I would say, and we're met about two-thirds of the way up that highway by the lodge vehicles coming out with the previous group, and we do this big inter Patagonia switch. The guests coming out go into the bus, and we go into the trucks, and then off we go into the lodge. Get there about noonish, leave about 7, and then get settled in, get a good meal in us, the first of many good meals there, and then we fish some of the local lagunas first. So the lagoon, the lodge sits on Laguna Verde, which sounds much better in Spanish than it does in English because it's basically green lake. And we fished there or one of the other lagunas for a while. The guides are I firmly believe they're sort of checking the group out and see how they can handle the conditions, because it is a little bit windy there at times, to say the least. But it really fires the fish up, gets that wave action churning the food in the shallows, which is primarily scuds. So these lagunas have fish to 10 pounds in them, maybe a little larger. And then the next day, and for the rest of the trip, then you're off to Lago Strobel, better known as Jurassic Lake. And the lodge has over 14 miles of access to the shore. So we're all fishing from shore, because you sure wouldn't want to go out in a boat. You wouldn't want to go out in a boat in that lake for 2 reasons. First of all, with the wind that comes up and how fast and how big it is, you'd probably get killed. You'd just be pounded against the rocks. And you don't need to, because the fish feed right along the edges of the shore, because the rocks, the calcium, it's a very rich lake full of scuds, and that wave action churns them up, and the fish come in shallow. They like it when it's a little rock and roll as far as wind going on. Protects them, masks their presence, churns up food. Most of your fish are caught within a reasonable cast length from shore. There's usually not too many reasons to bomb out 8 miles of line. Most of the time, the fish, you can almost stab them with your rod tip. So you can see these big submarines cruising by. It's intimidating and awe-inspiring all rolled in.
Are you fishing to a specific fish?
Sometimes you see them, but a lot of times you'll find them, they'll pod up, and so you'll have a group of them out there. And with the wave action, it's not always easy to sight fish because it's not flat calm. There are times it does get flat calm. I always tell my guests, you can probably expect one day to be all or part of the day to be calm and bright, and it's tough. That water is very clear. Those fish are reluctant to come in shallow, and so it's pretty challenging. So when that wave action's up due to the wind, it's usually a lot better. We're fishing, it's all floating lines, fishing scud patterns to a degree, but most part we're fishing, we fish balanced leeches a lot, either casting and retrieving them or hanging them under indicators or dry dropper. There's minimal insect activity. I think I found signs of a few cased caddis in there, but nothing else. Maybe some ridiculously tiny midges. And but they'll still come up and eat a big chubby Chernobyl on the top, which is pretty exciting to watch. A fish with the size of a small child's head come out of the water.
Wow! So they'll eat chubbies on the surface?
Big chubbies, like 6s.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it sucks. It's horrible. I don't know how anybody can put up with that kind of thing.
And that's interesting, because this kind of reminds me, as you're talking, is like Pyramid Lake. Is it similar to Pyramid at all?
Yeah, it is similar in look and
wind.
And wind, yeah. Pyramid is a good training ground for Patagonia, for Lago Strobel, because of that. Same kind of topography, looks very similar. Lago Strobel itself is rich in calcium, so all the rocks around the shoreline are either weather-worn and smooth or look like coral heads because of the calcium that's encrusted around them. So you can, on smaller rocks, you can sometimes kick at them, and that calcium will break open like an Easter egg. Wow. Revealing the rock inside. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And really the 3 food sources are the scuds I mentioned, zooplankton, and snails. So, your big streamers, guys bring down their big, I'm sure they might eat the odd juvenile, but you rarely see. The only time I've ever seen juvenile rainbows in there is in the Barrancosa River itself. And that's the river that feeds Lago Strobel and where the original stocking took place. Years ago, a rancher, Estancia owner down there, wanted his own, as I understand it, wanted his own private fishery, introduced McLeod strain rainbows that had been, I think, one generation through an Argentine hatchery, put them in, and some stayed and most left and went out into the lake that was just crawling with scuds and rich, and the rest is sort of history. So it's a very special place.
Today's episode is presented by Jackson Hole Fly Company. Jackson Hole Fly Company is a new kind of online fly shop. They design and manufacture their own high-quality fly rods, reels, gear, and over 1,000 fly patterns. Right now, you can get 25% off your first order. Go to jhflyco.com/swing to get started today. That's jhflyco.com/swing. There you go. Well, this is good. I think that, probably a good transition into what we're going to cover today. But another special place is, like we said, the Henry's Fork area, Henry's Lake, yes. Sheridan. I mean, it's not far away from like the stuff in Montana, Utah. I mean, there's a bunch of lakes out here, and you've covered this. We're going to talk about some of this today. Maybe just, before we jump into this, give us a little primer on, again, somebody is getting ready to fish. They're going to be heading to, Sheridan is a private lake, but there's Henry's Lake, some of these other ones you fish out there. What should they be thinking about to prepare if they're kind of doing their own thing? What would you tell that person?
Well, it's all, as most destinations, it's seasonal. I love the Island Park area. I first went there. I went with the New Fly Fisher to film an episode with Bob Jacklin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we fished primarily rivers there, but we did do one day on Hebgen Lake through Firehole Lodge. They're located on the south shores of Hebgen. And so we did that. I fell in love with the area. Just, it's just very pleasing on the eye. It's sort of the epicenter of blue ribbon fly fishing when you think about rivers like the Madison, the Henry's Fork, the Gallatin, all the Yellowstone Park rivers, the Yellowstone River itself, all the Cutthroat, Browns, Rainbows, all of that stuff. But they have some very good stillwater fisheries there. You've got, as you've mentioned, Henry's Lake, Hebgen Lake, Island Park Reservoir can fish well from time to time, Cliff and Wade, Quake, and there's probably other lakes I've yet to discover there, but those lakes keep me pretty occupied, particularly Hebgen, Henry's, and as you mentioned, Sheridan, the private lake in the Island Park area. So it's kind of this epicenter of fly fishing, and most people look at it for the moving water stuff, the rivers and streams. So when you go down there, I can remember some of my drives. I remember particularly one year, it was a high water year. So a lot of the rivers, your traditional, governed by runoff, are just bank to bank and swollen. And the Madison wasn't, because its flow is somewhat governed by its outflow out of Quake Lake, but it was packed with anglers. There was at every access point, there had to be 50 anglers upstream, downstream on each side, plus drift boats going through. And I pulled into Quake Lake, and I think there was one other car in the parking lot.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. So it's a pretty special place. Sometimes I wonder if I should tell people about it, because it's kind of nice to go down, to drive down, because it's a 13-hour drive for me to get down there. So
that's not bad.
Yeah, it's, got iTunes and podcasts.
There you go.
It's just a special place for, and it's the same tactics I use everywhere else. The good thing about stillwater trout is they don't know borders, so they eat the same thing. So we spend a lot of time in early spring fishing chironomids. What I've noticed, it's getting more and more popular with the anglers I bump into down there, but prior to that, it was sort of fishing a woolly bugger on a type 2, dragging it around, or fishing dry droppers, which are two presentation tactics in my stillwater arsenal that are way down the list, just the way I develop. So fish a lot of chironomids there. It's got some outstanding Callibaetis hatches, particularly in the month of August, which is one of the reasons I like it, because most of my lakes in August are in the middle of the summer doldrums. They're the trout have gone deep. The oxygen content isn't great due to the increased water temperature, so we a lot of times leave them alone. But due to the elevation in particularly in the West Yellowstone area, lakes like Hebgen, their Callibaetis hatches rocking in August, and you get the great dry fly activity. You get the gulpers, which the lake is famous for, and they're called that because when these fish take a spent spinner or a terrestrial later on in the season off the surface, their rise is an audible gulp. You hear it. It's
Wow.
quite noticeable, and I can remember once just, looking for rises and hearing his gulp behind my left shoulder and just pivoting and firing at
So
it.
not like a splash, it's a gulp.
No, it's a gulp.
Just like you were gulping. Yep.
Literally, yeah. The lake is flat calm. These spinners are lying spent on the surface, body flush, wings outstretched and flush. Very hard to see. And the trout know that they're not going anywhere. This is a food source that's not going to run away on them. And they just leisurely come up to it, open their mouth, take it down. And of course, when they do that, they get that gulp of air with them as well, which makes that as their jaw comes down on that food source, it makes that gulp sound, which is your trigger to get a fly in that area, try to read. And it's fun because these fish will adopt predictable rise patterns if the conditions are right. So you can see a fish rising, and every 8 feet it comes up, you just drop your fly 8 feet out in front of it. And if you're lucky, if the fly is good, the presentation is good, and the fish is in the mood, it'll just, without hesitation, come up and take your fly down. So real 1v1 experience, if you like that kind of thing. The beauty of dry fly fishing in lakes is we don't get the dry fly opportunities that rivers and streams are famous for. Most of the fish, have sort of learned to feed deeper on the nymphs or the pupa. It's safer, it's more efficient, but lakes like Hebgen are the exception. They'll come up and feed on the surface, so you want to be prepared for that opportunity and take full advantage of it. So it's a lot of fun.
That is
1v1.
cool.
You put your fly out there, put it in the right place, and if that fish doesn't come up for it or veers left or right, you've done something wrong.
Yeah. And what is the 1v1?
That's you versus the fish.
Oh, that's it.
So the fish has come up. You've seen it rise. You've hopefully got the right fly on. You make the right presentation. The fly lands delicately and appropriately in the right spot, and the fish just takes it like it's a natural, just comes up. So that's when you win that battle, that you get the reward. Otherwise, you get rejected and you left scratching your head or stomping your feet or just shrugging your shoulders in disbelief.
Gotcha. This is great. And so on the Callibaetis, let's describe first what a Callibaetis is, just a little bit, just high level, and then
Sure.
where would somebody go to learn more about the etymology? Because I think Callibaetis, right? So I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
Yeah, my apologies for that. So Callibaetis is one of the few Stillwater-based mayflies out there. It's from the swimming nymph family, so Baetis blue-winged olives, which many river and stream anglers are familiar with. It's its larger cousin, if you will. So it's a nymph that lives in lakes. There's not a lot of mayflies that live in lakes because the oxygen requirements. Lakes aren't, don't have that current to help augment the oxygenation in the water. So these mayflies have external gills. They vibrate and flutter continuously as they extract oxygen from the water, and they swim like little minnows, little rapid undulations of their body, and move in little bursts and then a pause, little bursts and a pause, and move through. So, in that area too, you will get a little bit of trico action as well. And some other mayflies, and those are a lot of times related to the inflows, the streams that come in the South Fork of the Madison that comes into Madison Arm, and I have just gone a total blank on the river that comes into the north end up in the Grayling Arm. Could even be the Grayling, but those are the two most popular spots on the east side of the lake because they're shallow and full of nutrients, and that's where you're going to get your plant growth established, and then all the food sources that call that home, and the trout go in there to hunt. So you do get some of that activity. Another mayfly you might run into in lakes is Hexagenia, limbata,
Right.
the big,
Giant
giant. Yeah, that's my kind of mayfly.
At dark, right? Is that kind of an even, or I guess that's for brown trout fishing, but yeah.
Yeah, they are an insect that's known for having nocturnal emergences. I've been on some waters that they will come off in the day, but those nymphs are huge. As big as your pinky. And the adults are like a size 4 sometimes. So that's a good size mayfly. Where's your Callibaetis? Up in our waters in Canada, early season, we may see them as large as a 12, but usually 14, 16s, and 18s. And the good thing about Callibaetis is they have what's called multi-broods. So they will have multiple hatches within a season. So you'll have an emergence early season, and then the progeny of that batch will hatch again later on in the season, and they're a little smaller because the growth time between the different emergences is less, so they're smaller. And you'll tend to see darker colored adults in the spring because it's cooler, so that dark body absorbs the sun's energy, because mayflies, once they reach the adult stage, they can't take in water. They're on a pretty tight timeline to mate and reproduce because they're going to die. Whereas in the warmer months, they tend to be a little lighter colored because they need to reflect the sun's energy somewhat so they don't get dehydrated. But Callibaetis mayflies, the females are unique because most mayflies, when they hatch, they become spinners, they fly off, they molt again pretty quickly and shed their skin once more. And now they're sexually mature. They can mate. So they have clear wings, long tails, get into these rhythmic dances above the water or along the shoreline. And then the females lay eggs and die on the water surface. Whereas Callibaetis females actually, once they've been impregnated, they gestate the eggs inside. So they will sit in the shoreline vegetation for a period of 3 to 5 days, gestate those eggs, and then come back and lay them. So as soon as those eggs hit the water surface, they hatch almost immediately. All right, and jumpstart those little guys on their way. So kind of a unique twist in the mayfly world. And the other mayfly you'll see is Canis, nicknamed the white wing curse. And you will see these. They're tiny. They're almost all white, the females with a little sort of coffee brown thorax area. But the nymphs bury themselves, or crawlers. They bury themselves in the bottom debris, so they're not typically visible to foraging trout. Sure, you might do a throat analysis and get one in there, but it's not something I would, a small, tiny pheasant tail would probably work. Then they crawl, they migrate like stoneflies into the shallows, really skinny water. They hatch there at night and almost immediately transform into the spinner, mate, and die. So it's a little confusing to the angler because they come to the lake the next morning and see all these little white mayflies, spinners scattered all over the surface and think they missed something. And really, it's not something I focus on in my fly box.
Yeah. That's a good question. That's why I want to ask you about the box, because we got these flies. There's a few mayflies out there, but really, there's a lot of other stuff going on under the surface.
Oh, definitely.
So if we're coming on this trip, if somebody's going to be heading to this island park area, Henry's Lake, all these lakes, what would be, what does your fly box look like? Does it look different than it would look if you were fishing up in Canada?
Not really. It'd be well represented by chironomids, both the pupa and larval stages. And then scuds would be represented in there. Callibaetis, damsels. There's some incredible damsel activity in populations down there. I've had days where I've been fishing where my arms are literally coated because I'm on the downwind side, typically with the wind at my back, and these adult damsels use me as a bit of a windbreak and all congregate and just your arms are blue with all the adults sitting
right.
there.
Wow.
I've had some good luck using dragonfly nymphs, particularly in the fall months in the shallows, stripping those around. Leeches are always a good idea. And a lot of the lakes have, little populations of forage fish as well. So small streamers can work particularly well. Your little zonker type streamers to represent small bait fish, juvenile trout, those kind of things. Most of the time I'm fishing, I do have a tendency to fish chironomids whenever I can because it's two reasons. It's such a popular food source. Every Stillwater trout eats those. And it's technically demanding at times. It's, if you like solving problems and using different techniques to unlock the mystery, it's a great hatch. It's the kind of hatch you'll spend a lifetime perfecting and playing with all the time. You never sort of rest. At least I never have. Always experimenting with new leader setups, new presentation options, new fly patterns, especially. Always keeps you challenged that way. So that's sort of, and attractors. So the gaudy stuff, your blobs, your boobies, apse worms, those kind of things. These are flies that you strip aggressively through the water most of the time. Sometimes with beadhead blobs, we do suspend them under a strike indicator because we often use them when the trout are in the summer months or coming out of the summer months where they've been in deep water a lot, where the oxygen is at that time, and feeding on zooplankton, little almost microscopic food sources that they strain through their gills and just take them down. Rich in calories, for years tough to match, but the English sort of helped us figure it out, and using patterns like a blob, which for your river and stream angler looks like an egg, but in Stillwater we believe them to be zooplankton clusters. So, but they'll get on those. And the other benefit of those attractors, if you're fishing a multi-fly setup, which you can in that island park, Henry's Lake area, you can fish an attractor on your team of flies, and the fish obviously can take that fly, but they can also be attracted to the flies. They see that larger, gaudier fly at distance, will come over to investigate, have a look, and then maybe turn down or turn away from it. But as they turn away and pass down the leader, there might be a small mayfly nymph on the setup as well, or a small leech or something a little more natural, and the fish take that. So that fly attracts, and it can be a little misleading sometimes, because I've had anglers that have said, they're fishing this team of flies. And of course, whenever you fish multiple flies, there's always your risk of tangling goes up. So that blob, for example, or fab or booby is not catching fish, and they take it off and their success rate drops, because those fish are finding it harder to find your smaller natural flies now, because they don't have the benefit of that gaudy attractor standing out at distance and pulling them in for a look. So, we also fish with those attractors. A lot of times attractors such as a booby, which has foam eyeballs, and the fab, which has a split foam tail. It's an acronym for foam-arsed blob. Because in England, some of these attractor flies, particularly the booby, some of the fisheries were banning it, not so much for effectively catching fish, but because fly anglers were becoming one-dimensional. That's all they did. So they're trying to encourage them through the rules on the fisheries there to fish other ways. So competition fishing is very prevalent over there, and I believe a Scottish team sort of asked the question, well, if we put foam at the back end of the fly, is that legal? And I guess the rules makers were scratching their head and going, well, I guess not. So they came up with this split foam tail sticking out the back. So you tie the foam in, split it. I usually carefully use a straight edge to split it, and then use your usual Fritz materials for the body in single colors, multiple colors. They become you could fill an entire fly box with attractors of all the different color combinations you could have. And so this fly, the booby, kind of wobbles and rises and falls. The fab, when you strip it, obviously moves horizontally. And then when you pause it, that foam tail kicks in and makes the back end of the fly pop up. So you have a different action to it. And it is one of my favorite attractors, because it sinks a little faster than a booby. A booby's quite buoyant with those foam eyeballs on it, but the fab's a little less buoyant. So there's days that, in this multi-fly setup where you want one style over the other. And of course, personal preference comes in. I've caught a lot of fish on fab, so I have a lot of confidence in it. And that's a huge factor, I think, whenever you're fly fishing, no matter what you're chasing. If you believe in what you're doing and the flies you're using, you tend to fish them better and do those little things that you don't even realize you're doing that lead to your success. So we fish a lot of those. And I recall you mentioned Sheridan.
Yeah.
I was down there last year, and we had such a warm, in the West, we had such a warm fall. And so we still had chironomids coming off in early October, big ones, like size 12s. And so these fish were up on the surface, taking the odd adult, but a lot of times taking the pupa as they ascend to the surface and suspend momentarily beneath the surface film, rather, and then crawl out and emerge into the adult form, which looks like a mosquito, and fly off. Thankfully, the females don't bite. They don't need blood for egg development. So these fish were coming up and taking these flies randomly. And if you tried to fish to these rising fish, you would have driven yourself crazy, because they were so unpredictable in their rise forms. You just would have been beating the water to a froth and casting in an area where the fish is, only to have it rise 50 feet to your right and all this kind of stuff. So what I decided to do was fish a technique called the washing line. So the washing line is a multi-fly setup where you put the buoyant fly on the point position, the one furthest away from the fly line. And then off independent droppers, you hang one or two flies, typically, off these independent droppers. So I just did a 2-fly setup, tangles less than a 3-fly setup. And I had a floating line on. I just had I think I started with like a 7.5 foot leader as my core, my foundation, and then added tippet. So at the end of that 7.5 footer, I had a dropper when I tied my tippet on, and then 5 feet away, I had this fab on the point. So that's the one with the split foam tail. And then I hung a little beadhead chromie, about a size 12 chromie off of there. And I would just cast this line out. It would land on the surface. And then once it settled, I just did a slow, steady hand twist retrieve. And what this washing line does, the buoyancy of the fly in conjunction with my fly line allows you to track your flies back towards you at a controlled level. So when you see fish rising on the surface like that, you know that a lot of them are up near the surface. So you need to keep your fly up near the surface, within a foot or two. Mm-hmm. So this setup would allow me to do that. So I'm tracking the flies back through where the fish are feeding, and did very well. A lot of fish ate the chironomid, but you get the odd fish that whacks the the fab as well. So, and it was a great way because rather than trying to target individual fish, I had fish rising randomly all over the place in front of me. I could just place a long, comfortable cast, allow it to settle, and track those flies all the way back through those feeding fish and let them decide when they're going to eat it. And it worked very, very well. So, and you could do that. You could do that in a Callibaetis hatch too. You could put your dry fly, parachute Adams, out on the point and hang a little pheasant tail or a little unweighted mayfly nymph or perhaps a soft hackle or an English pattern called a cruncher, which is a pheasant tail with a little cheap grade hackle on the front of it spread around. The hackle helps slow the sink rate of the fly and track it through those rising fish. So it's it's a favorite technique of mine to use the washing line. The
washing line is what it's called.
Yes, because the flies hang off independent droppers and that buoyant fly, and they resemble clothes on a washing line. It's an English technique again. They do a lot of stillwater fishing over there, and pretty innovative gang. And so that sort of has migrated or immigrated over to North America now. And it's very popular with the competition fly fishers that use it. And I did a little competition fishing many years ago in a younger Phil, but it's a very applicable technique to anybody fishing still waters.
Bearvault is one way to assure your next backcountry trip stays memorable, epic, and safe. Bearvault builds a rugged polycarbonate locking canister that keeps bears and other wild animals away from your food. This in turn keeps your food safe, keeps the bears safe, and keeps you safe. I've got a classic story that I've told a few times about the bear taking my backpack while up in Alaska. I had my lunch and some snacks in there and just went up around the corner to fish for a bit. And when I got back, it was totally gone. If I would have had that Bearvault right at that moment, I would have been okay because my food would have been completely sealed. The bear would have had no idea and no reason to take my backpack. So a good reminder there. You might not realize it, but this type of thing happens all the time, even to experienced outdoorsmen. The great news for us is now we can experience the great stuff of a remote trip without ever having to worry about animals fiddling with our stuff. Sleep soundly knowing your vault has sealed the deal for you. Believe it or not, food storage is a key consideration while backcountry hiking, fishing, or camping. The Bearvault also has some great bonus features like the see-through sidewall so you can find your stuff really easy, and a large opening, plus it doubles as a nice camp stool. This thing is legit. It definitely is this might be my favorite feature is the camp stool. I love a good chair out there. Check in with the crew at Bearvault at wetflyswing.com/Bearvault. That's Bearvault, BEARVAULT. Okay, back to the show. That was great information. We're going to keep this going. I want to give a quick shout out to the giveaway we have going right now. There's a couple places, but at wetflyswing.com/giveaway, we're giving away a trip and a bunch of gear to this area. So that's one place that we've got going right now as we speak. Also, we're working on putting together this live event. So if people want to get some more information on what we're talking about that we don't cover today, we're going to have we're setting this up now, but I think we're going to have you come on for a live event to answer questions. So,
cool. That'll be fun.
We'll throw that link out there at wetflyswing.com/live, and people can actually enter or just join that. They can just join and check it out. So cool. All right. So there's a couple things on this. I wanted to circle back around. There's so much information here with the flies. Let's take it back to all the flies. You talk chironomids, scuds, all the lineup. Yep. If you give us a name, you talked about a few of them, but what would be a few patterns that would cover each of those categories?
There's in the chironomid larva pattern, I have a pattern of mine called the Holo worm. That pattern is available, and I'll let you know when they are on mine and Brian Chan's online Stillwater Fly Fishing Store, stillwaterflyfishingstore.com. Shameless promotion there, Dave.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, keep it going.
So we have the Holo worm, which is basically a curved scud hook, little red marabou tail to suggest a wiggling larva, a red body, and a bead. There's also a pattern designed by Jerry McBride out of Spokane, Washington, called the bionic worm, which works well in deep water, so 15, 18, 20 feet down, where a lot of chironomid larvae like to establish themselves because they love muddy bottoms. So that's where you're going to find a lot of mud in the lakes in the deeper water where the weed growth is minimal or reduced because there's no sunlight doesn't get down there to stimulate weed growth through photosynthesis. So that's got a hot pink, fluorescent pink tail. the red body, and a hot orange bead. So when you first look at that fly, you go, ugh, that's a little over the top, but
Right.
they like it. Other flies in the pupal stages, your basic black and red chironomid, black body, red rib of some sort, wire or holographic mylar or flashaboo, and a black bead with a tuft of yarn for white gills, or an all white bead, your basic, thread body rib, just a bigger zebra midge, basically.
Yep.
Black and red is a good color, black and silver. When the chironomids are hatching, you're seeing the adults fly off. The pupa, as they elevate, become quite shiny because they trap gas beneath their skin that provides buoyancy. And so that helps them elevate up to the surface, and also it helps expel themselves from their pupal shuck and transform into the adults. They become quite silvery. So a pattern such as micromi with a silver body, red rib, black bead, yarn gills works very well. You can also tie it with anti-static bag material, which is what electronic equipment's packaged in. You cut it into thin, narrow strips and make a body out of that, because this transition from dull to fully inflated, shiny pupa, sometimes they'll focus on this gunmetal gray or pewter color. It's not bright silver, but it's kind of a shiny gray. So we'll have those. And another pattern I've done very well with down there is a pattern of mine called the Collaborator, which is kind of a burnt orange coloration with a little red butt, because sometimes the pupa, the residual hemoglobin from the larval stage, will gather both in the tip of the abdomen and along the abdominal segment. So that's why red is a prominent rib and butt color in those flies. That one is, again, available both on my YouTube. I also have a YouTube channel, Dave, as you know, that a lot of these flies I tie on there. So if you're a tyer, go to my YouTube channel. If you're a buyer, go to the store.
And on the YouTube channel, are you putting more stuff out there on flies, or as you go,
Yep.
or how's that look? Yeah,
it's predominantly been a fly tying channel. I am expanding once my schedule winds down a bit with a little more tips, leader setups, those kind of things, kit bag tours, boat tours, all the things I get a lot of questions on, and vlogging, where I go out on the water and film my day on the water with a specific educational theme in mind, whether it's using washing line tactics or doing this or whatever I'm doing, rather not just this Phil goes fishing and you get to come along kind of thing.
Yeah, cool. And I'm looking at the channel now, the Phil Roy fly fishing. Yeah, you got one here, tie the simple Callibaetis. So, Callibaetis done. You got tying a simple, right, some leech. So yeah, you got some different patterns. This is awesome. So we'll put a link to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just come out. A friend of mine helps me film and edit them, and we shoot them in batches. So I've just shot 16 of them, and I'm going to go back into the studio, if you will, again when I get back in a couple of weeks and rattle off another 16. Because as I get into the show season, as you know, it's tough to do all this stuff, but you have it in the can, much like doing your podcast, right? Then you just release them. You do them in batches, and then you can create a regular schedule. So my goal is, once the season starts to wind down, is start putting a video out a week, just to build the frequency. So it's kind of like a TV channel. Once everybody knows you're going to put something new out, they sort of become attuned to that and follow it.
Subscribers.
Yeah. So other patterns, damsels, pearly damsel is a favorite of mine. Striptease damsels, these are all available on both the store and the site. Mayfly nymphs, I love my Hurl May. I've got turkey quill Callibaetis is one of the first patterns I ever tied. I've got one called a Stillwater Callibaetis I use as well. A parachute Adams is great for the adults. I've got a few duns. You mentioned that one. It's just up on my site.
Yep.
My Stillwater dun, kind of more of a synthetic based pattern. Your blobs and your fabs, those are well represented on my site and on the store. So Volmaris blobs, blobs themselves, boobies, apps worm. I'm working with Montana Fly Company to get a version of that I tie. I christened the shower spider because it's tied on a jig hook with a head turner bead on it, these teardrop tungsten beads. So you can fish it balanced. If you attach the fly to your tippet using a clinch knot, it will orientate to fish horizontally. But I really like to strip this fly. And I took this version down to Argentina with me on my last trip. And red is a popular color down there. So like a red copper john in a size 10 or 12 is a good fly. Flies with red in them, they seem to like them down there. And so I thought after about day 3, well, let's give this thing a try. I tied 4 of them just on a lark, cast it out there using floating line. I use Rio's outbound short. It's a great line for the wind down there. Cast it out, let it sink for about 10, 15 seconds, and aggressively strip it back in 4 to 6 inch pulls. So this fly has a fluorescent red or orange body and these long stretch floss, super floss, span flex, this long stretchy leg material. And we're talking 3 extra long on the shank. So these things are like 2.5 inch long legs sticking out, 2 out the front, 2 out the back, 2 out the sides. So when you strip this thing back in the water, these legs are kicking and flowing and moving. And when you look at it, it looks like a drowned spider. You know, if you ever got a spider in the shower and you're like, drown it and put it down the drain, that's what it looks like. And I had 3 fish follow that fly in about a foot behind that were between 10 and 15 pounds that followed it in. So I knew I was on to something. I flopped it back out there again, give it a couple of strips and locked up. And that's what I fished for the rest of the week. So that fly has quickly won favor in my heart. So that's on my YouTube channel as well, the Argentine apps, or shower spider, as I call it now.
Cool. So that gives us a few patterns. So as let's take it back into that Henry's Lake area. So if we were kind of planning a trip to, say, the Henry's, Lake, Henry's Fork or Lake, that area, or any of those other ones, what would be, again, coming up to the new lake, what are you thinking about? That's always a question that always comes up, right? You're at a new lake. How do you start? Where do you start fishing? And how do you plan to prepare for this?
Well, I do a lot of study before I get down there. So you can go online, look at Facebook groups. There's still a few internet forums around. Look at fishing reports for fly shops. I know there's a couple of fly shops in that area that do have a Stillwater focus to them. So they can give you, either online or you can call them. So you've got some idea. If you can get a hold of a bathymetric map, an underwater contour map, that will give you some clues as to where the different shallow and deep spots are. And I like to fish those transitions if I can, where it's, along the edges of drop-offs, because the fish will cruise those edges like a game trail. And if they get startled, they can quickly zip off into the depths to avoid whatever startled them. But in the shallows is where all the food is. That's where, most of the times in lakes, we're fishing shallow water because sunlight stimulates plant growth, and that creates habitat for food. So Henry's Lake, which we've mentioned, we haven't really talked about it much yet, is a massive lake. It's big and shallow and rich in weed beds. Like, it's just one giant shoal. It's a giant fish supermarket. There's lots of goodies for fish to eat there in the form of scuds and leeches and chironomids and damsels and caddis. And, all the major food groups are there. So it's a very good fishery for growing big fish, but can be very, very challenging because the fish can scatter and be anywhere because there's so much habitat for them to occupy. So when I go to a new lake, I've done that. I get to the lake shore. I try to sort of match up that mental picture I've been building through my pre-trip analysis, and then put it, say, okay, looking at my bathymetric map, okay, that spot's over there and that spot's there, and those kind of things. And then I'm looking for 3 things in a lake. I'm looking for comfort, protection, and food. So comfort comes in the way of primarily water temperature and its relationship to oxygen content. So trout are pretty narrow-minded as far as their oxygen. I'm looking for water in that, let's say, 50 to 65 degree Fahrenheit range. So I use electronics, and I also have a thermometer on a little string if I want to probe the depths a little deeper. And I'm going to look for, water temperature where the trout are comfortable and can basically function. Because if you can't breathe properly and metabolically can't function, you're not terribly interested in eating.
Right.
Right. If you think about the analogy I use is, if I ever ran in the Boston Marathon and didn't have a heart attack after about the first mile, and actually finished it, you came up to me later and offered me a cheeseburger, as much as I like cheeseburgers. I'm like, Dave, get that out of my face right now. I'm just trying to get my breath back. So similar kind of analogy. And then protection is another factor. And those are, factors that'll give the trout a sense of confidence and sort of throw caution to the wind and feed. So that could be a rippled surface, an algal bloom, because people look at algae and go, ugh, and Henry's Lake is rich, got lots of algae in it, but a lot of times that algae is a plant. So its whole growth is governed by sunlight. So it's going to be most concentrated near the surface, 5 to 10 feet down. Underneath of that, it can be relatively clear, and the trout forage away in great happiness there. So there's that. I mentioned structure, drop-offs, weed beds, those kind of things, points of land, rocky outcroppings, sunken islands, all that kind of stuff. Any irregularity you can find, and again, that's where the electronics come in. That's why I call them sounders, not so much for their fish finding ability, but more for their ability to help you identify structure that you just can't see beneath the surface. And lastly, food, which is, what hatches are going on and where are those bugs most likely to be found. And again, most of the time we're looking as stillwater fly fishers for that water 20 feet deep or less because of the influence of the sun stimulating weed growth and then providing habitat for food. That's the Costco, the Walmart, the grocery store, the underwater world where fish go to feed. So, if you plant yourself there and fish those areas at some point in the day, some fish should come in for a bite to eat, and you can hopefully coax them to do that. So,
Wow, this is amazing.
that's an episode unto itself.
Well, and I was just going to say
maybe one for the littoral zone.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, I'm just doing some work. So shout out to Littoral Zone number 1. And we have, this is really easy to find. We've got this on the website under podcast and Littoral Zone, and we've got them all listed there. I think we're up to 5 now, Littoral Zone episodes, maybe more. I think
6.
Yeah, 5. I think we got the 6th one's coming out. It'll be out when this goes live. But the cool thing is you could search it right there, and episode number 1 is actually Finding Fish.
Yes.
Finding fish on Stillwater. So that was a big thing. And you got into some other stuff. But so the cool thing about that is that we can take the deep dive. And right now we're going to hit the surface on a lot of this, and then we go deeper with the littoral zone.
Yeah, the littoral zone is the fancy name for the shoal area of the lake where all the feeding takes place. So it's it's a play on words for the name of the podcast. So. Yeah,
definitely. And I know you covered fly lines on that littoral zone as well, but let's just touch on that real quick because you mentioned the dry lines and fishing that. So when would you, it seems like the hover line or the intermediate might get below the wind a little bit and get you. Yeah. When is the dry line better to use?
Obviously when you're using indicators, sometimes personal preference. It's the way I had to learn to fish chironomids. We used to fish floating lines, not very good ones, long leaders built primarily out of Maxima, unweighted flies, and had to cast out. You let this fly sink. And the whole success of the method was related to the weight of the pattern. And when you're fishing chironomids, you couldn't really weight them because you made them too fat and obese and they just didn't look natural. Maxima, while a very strong monofilament product, doesn't sink all that well. And we had to, it's a combination of letting your fly sink, how fast you move it. We usually move it creepy, small, slow. We usually say when you got the retrieve figured out, you cut it in half again. Your pattern weight and your leader length. It's kind of you get those 4 things in balance and you can have some success. So that's good technique for using not only with chironomids, mayfly nymphs, and of course fishing under indicators, which has become very popular. That's a floating line technique. Other lines, like you mentioned, the intermediates, your clear intermediates would be good because they sink anywhere, depending on the line type and the manufacturer, from maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches per second. So that allows you, it's a great line if you like to paddle around and troll in a float tube or a pontoon boat, it's good for that. If you want to strip leeches and little bait fish patterns and fish damsel nymphs, even mayfly nymphs in slightly deeper water, you can do that too. And then the other line I'd probably have is something fast sinking in a type 5, maybe, or if you fished Henry's a lot, a type 3 is a good line too. These are lines that sink at 3 and 5 inches per second, good for fishing attractors, fishing deeper, stripping leeches, streamers, those kind of things as well. But as you saw in those 2 episodes, we have way more fly lines available to us in lakes than these 3. But I would call those the 3 core lines. A floating line that is best suited for casting long leaders and indicators, not necessarily a dry line that has that long front taper that dissipates casting energy and facilitates that delicate presentation. That's a good line if you're on Hebgen and fishing to gulping fish, of course. But your indicator type lines or lines suited for long leaders are going to have a bit more of an aggressive head to help have the mass closer to the leader to help turn it all over. And then your clear intermediate and your fast sinker. And then you can start filling in the other fly lines, which the analogy I use is like golf clubs. You can, and I'm a lousy golfer, but you could probably golf with a wood, a favorite iron, a sand wedge, maybe, and a putter, maybe, Right. So I'm sure some golfing guy, no way. But anyway, I'm such a bad golfer. All the clubs in the world won't help me. But when you start getting more and more into the Stillwater stuff, you'll find these lines have their little niche in there and they really perform. And once you've had success on them, they're a bit addictive and you need one bad, because I probably in my kit bag, I probably have anywhere from 16 to 20 fly lines with me at any one time. And I've usually got 2 or 3 rigged up and ready to go. Which I like to do because it's quick to make changes. A lot of times we're creatures of path of least resistance. So if it's too much effort to change up a fly line and string a rod, then you won't do it. And then you find out later in the day you probably should have done it because you missed out. So if you have an indicator rod rigged up, your clear intermediate rigged up, and maybe that type 3 if you're fishing Henrys, you can quickly change. You go, okay, the indicator doesn't seem to be working. Let's try if they want to chase a moving fly. So let's pick up the clear intermediate because I'm fishing, at the mouth of one of the creeks that come in, and it's only 8 feet deep around these weed pockets. So I'm going to put the clear intermediate on, and maybe strip a leech or strip a small streamer, a bait fish pattern, or fish a damsel nymph, and see if that works. And because it's just a matter of putting one down and picking the next one up, you're going to adapt quickly and make those changes. So.
Today's episode is sponsored by Chota Outdoor, legendary comfort and equipment you can trust. Chota insists on the finest material and craftsmanship to assure you have the highest standards of quality. You'll feel in control of the elements in your Chota gear. Every product is solidly backed with a no-nonsense warranty against defects. And I have a family connection to Chota over the years. Back in the shop, the old shop, my dad carried Chota, and he wore those proudly with confidence. And now I'm carrying on that tradition, supporting Chota, and I'm very excited about the new products coming out this year and working with Chota in 2023. I'm pretty rough in my gear and find myself putting a lot of miles on that gear and being pretty rough on it. So it's good to know that the Chota gear is durable, is bomber, and I don't have to worry about it. And even on those long trips, when if you have a blowout, it's not going to be a good situation. So I'm excited to keep digging into this year. Clean, comfortable, charismatic, and ready for any situation you can throw at it. You can head over right now to Chota Outdoor at wetflyswing.com/Chota. That's CHOTA to support this podcast and a great family company right now. Okay, now back to the show. And I was just going to give a shout out. So the Littoral Zone, they can find it there, or they can just go to wetflyswing.com/LZ, and that's going to redirect right over to the landing page with all those episodes. And number 5, you actually covered making sense of Stillwater fly lines.
Yeah, that was a 2-episode series.
Yeah, 2-episode series.
We did the first series was all, talking about, the fly line makeup, how they're put together,
right,
and that influence on Stillwater lines, and then all the floating lines from floating to midge tip, and then part 2 was all about the sinking line stuff.
Yeah, sinking line's good.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a temperature, cover. So let's say we're in a spot we think is going to work. Now you've got to fly. So where do you start? What is the first thing you're putting on? Do you start with kind of the chironomids, or do you how would you go? Let's just think now.
Well, yeah, because I am looking for signs of hatch. So it's, when I get to the launch, I'm looking around, I'm checking trees, what's flying in the air. If there's a spider web around, have a peekaboo in that, because any of the flying insects often get stuck in there and give you clues as to what ratio different. You could have Callibaetis in there and chironomid. You could have 2 Callibaetis duns and 20 chironomids in there. It's probably saying that chironomids might be the place to start. And then when you're moving around on the water, I don't usually go running around at 600 miles an hour. I usually cruise very, very slowly. Obviously in a pontoon boat or float tube, you're paddling or rowing. I use electric motors a lot in my boat. I'm going very slowly, and I'm looking in the water to see any signs of shucks. I'm looking for bird activity, those kind of things. So concentrate there. But yeah, in the spring months, I'm probably going to spend a lot of time focused on chironomids because it's such a prevalent food source. Even if there's other bugs coming off, it seems it's just like drifting midges on the Missouri River or something like that. They seldom turn one down. It's just such an easy food source for them to eat. They just swim up, inhale it, and move on to the next one. Minimal effort, lots of calories. And it could start, you fishing the chironomids in the morning, and then your Callibaetis start to emerge in the afternoon, or maybe damsels start to come off as the air temperature influences the water temperature, stimulates that hatch activity, and you change up. So you're always watching and seeing what's going on. Don't try to go in there with a preconceived notion. As much as I said fish chironomids, it's just keep your options open, because an experiment. And this is where, if I'm fortunate enough to get a fish, careful use of a throat pump to sample what it's just eaten by sampling its throat, then that will really tune in as to what's going on, what they're feeding. If they're not feeding, then you start, okay, I've caught a fish, but it's not got anything in it. It's not feeding. That's where your attractor patterns come up to play, because these fish aren't in a feeding mode right now. So now you can, trigger a feeding response out of them, or trigger an aggressive territorial response out of them by stripping one of those gaudy attractors by them and just make them snap at it.
Gosh, when you do the throat sample, how often do you get it where there's no bugs in there hardly at all?
It typically, it can happen anytime, but a lot of times you tend to see that more in the coming out of the summer time frame because they've been off in the deeper water. Their metabolism is slowed because they're, perhaps a little stressed if the water temperature's up. So you're not fishing them during that stress period, but they're coming out of it. The water temperature is starting to cool and they haven't quite got the feeding mode going yet. That's typically when you see it, but it can happen anytime. You can have periods of where they haven't fed. But the beauty of a food source like chironomids, these soft-bodied ones, mayfly nymphs, damsels, they're going to digest them in about 12 hours. So, they feed at them on the Monday and you're down there on the Tuesday, they're going to feed again because they've digested them all already and they got to go again, right? They got to keep that engine of theirs. They're not on Weight Watchers. They're on weight gainers. So they're looking for calories.
Yeah, right. Right. Good. What would be, would people, we get this question, we've had this question before, but, so we've been talking about some techniques and things like that. How do people improve from where they're at now? Like, how do they get up to that next level? Is it just a matter of getting out there and fishing more? Or are there any tips you give somebody maybe to get their casting, their entomology, all this stuff better? How do they get better at all this stuff?
Yeah, that's funny. I did a Zoom presentation to a club, and they asked a similar question. If I was to tell a new angler, a new fly fisher, what 2 things to do, and it was a little, I nicknamed it an ambush question because I have no idea it's coming. And but after a little bit of thought, the 2 things I said was be a sponge, learn all you can. So that today we're so blessed with, we mentioned YouTube, online learning now. I do online courses. I did a course with Brian Shan, a live course. I think we did 11 sessions on chironomids, right? So, and when we do these live courses, and a lot of them, you get the benefit of having access to the recordings of those. And you get other, we gave away our Conquering Chironomids DVD series we did a number of years ago, that kind of thing. Obviously go to outdoor fly fishing shows if they're in your neighborhood or not far away, because you can sit in on these seminars. You can actually, have your specific, I've lots of times been tracked down by somebody with a list of questions and sit down with a cup of coffee and we just walk through them if I've got the time in between presentations. That way, things like we're doing here today, the podcasts out there. There's so much good information that you can, on your way to the destination or driving to and from work, God forbid, you can listen to podcasts and improve your knowledge that way. Books are still a viable place to learn. I've got my most recent book, The Orvis Guide to Stillwater Trout Fishing, which is, some have called it a tome because I did 110,000 words. I kind of got really into that.
Oh, wow.
Because it's a subject I love so much. So that is a great reference as well. There's other great books out there. Brian Shan and Skip Morris did a book a number of years ago, Denny Rickard's stuff.
Yep. And didn't you have a recent book that another book that came out?
Yeah, I just had another book called, let me have a look here. I always forget my title.
Yeah. It's like Stillwater.
Fly tying with Phil Rowley and friends. And for the past 17 years, I've had the good fortune to be the fly tying columnist for BC Outdoors magazine, which is a British Columbia, Canada-based magazine that has a big circulation in the Pacific Northwest. And I do a column in there every episode. So, Dave, you're not the only one droning on at me about getting my content in.
Right.
And it's a blend of, river and stream, lake patterns, all kinds of things. And I've done a lot of Stillwater patterns. So it's just kind of a compilation of all those patterns, mostly from other anglers that, just quietly fish to themselves and design some really great flies, really, really good fly fishers, and try to get them the publicity they deserve and just to make people aware of some of the great things they've been doing. So that's out as well. Again, these are all available on the Stillwater fly fishing store. It's turning into an infomercial about that.
Right.
book.
Well, hey, we want the easy access. This is good.
Yeah. So those are like some of the places, just anywhere you can. There's so much, when I first started fishing lakes, you just had to go out there and bloody your nose and stumble around in the dark until you got something right. A lot of the old timers were pretty secretive because they'd gone through the same process, and that harder knowledge was something they didn't want to part with easily. So it was hard to, books. There wasn't much in the way of Stillwater books. There was no YouTubes. There was no videos. There was no podcasts. There was nothing.
Yeah.
Right. So it was tough. I think today an angler has so many good resources at their disposal to take advantage of. I'm kind of envious.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I'm looking at your site now. You got a book section, and yeah, you got it all here, books and DVDs.
Yep.
So you got everything you talked about plus more, conquering chironomids and everything. It's great.
Yeah, Brian and I put that store together because it's strictly Stillwater focused. That's all we deal with. We don't talk about the rivers and streams and all that stuff, much as we like to fish them ourselves, but that's what we focused on. And it came about when Brian and I would do shows together independently. Somebody would ask us about, where did you get that fly? Where did you get that material? Where did you get that whatever or piece of equipment? And we tell them where we got it, and they go off and find it. They couldn't find it. They get frustrated. Sometimes they'd send us a kind of terse email like, where did you get that stuff? I want it. You told me to get it. So we finally said, you know what? Why don't we sell it? Because, a lot of other fly shops have other focuses that they want, and that's good. They should. But the Stillwater stuff is not well understood by many. It's a bit of the dark arts. I always, the analogy, the ugly stepchild in the basement, when I'm on the fly fishing tour, I'm just the weird Stillwater guy. It's just me pretty well.
Yeah, you're the Stillwater guy. Yeah, you're the guy at the main, right? There's not a bunch of Stillwater guys at the big shows, right?
No, I'm just that weird guy, floating lines, 25-foot leaders, weighted flies. They'll look at me like, why the hell would you do that?
Right, and I'm looking at the Las Vegas Leech on your website right now. So when somebody goes on that, and if they're to add that and purchase that, is that something where, like, how does that, do you fulfill that, or where do those flies come from?
They're tied. We're both, Brian and I are royalty tires with Montana Fly Company. So all of those flies are tied by Montana Fly Company to our specifications. And it's run out of in my basement of my house. My wife and I do all the shipping, the receiving of product, and get it out there. So, all our books we sell on our site are all autographed by myself and Brian. So everybody gets an autographed book whenever they order a product like that. We have other products as well, Mystic rods, reel lines, those kind of things. Everything for the Stillwater fly fisher. Every little niche we can think of. So yeah, it's all done out of my basement. It's been turned into a little small store, a little warehouse.
You got your store. It's your fly shop. Yeah, essentially that's what it is. I mean, this day and age, it's like there's a lot of companies out there that are doing that same thing, right? Because you can, I mean, to a certain level, right? I mean, I guess if you're, I think in Montana or Umpqua, with them, they're selling probably millions of flies, right?
Oh, yeah.
So but Montana Fly Company is one of the big ones.
Yeah, and it's been sort of a mission of mine because not too many people understand Stillwater fly fishing, from the consumer to the retailer to, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody, but it's pretty focused niche. And, when you look at a fly shop in the West Yellowstone area, they've got such spectacular river and stream fisheries. They've got to speak to that. They've got to also have a little bit of dedication to the Stillwater fisheries there as well. So it's tough for them to meet all of those. And, when you, like I said in the analogy there, that on the Madison way back in the beginning, just the popularity of the rivers, that's what everybody sort of gravitates to. That's one of the reasons I love that Island Park, Henry's Fork area that we've been talking about, is because so much effort is spent on the rivers and streams that a lot of times your lake fishing goes unnoticed, right? And you can pull in and you don't have to fight the crowds, right? That's one of the things I like about lake fishing. Our bugs are bigger. We generally don't fish size 20 anything. We don't use 7X tippet, 8X tippet. We don't do that.
Bigger fish, bigger bugs. It seems like it's just all easier.
Yeah, yes and no.
Maybe the catching isn't always easier.
It's a little bit more, some of the methods are pretty finessey and pretty fiddly, kind of like Euro nymphing has become. As well, you can still get away with the basics in Euro nymphing, but if you want to get more and more into it, you start, paying attention to the Devin Olsons, Lance Segans, George Daniels of the world, that have really, and no disrespect to anybody I left off my list, those are the three that popped to the top of my mind.
Yeah.
How finessey it can become. And that's part of the fun of it. You can make this sport as complex as you want or as simple as you want. It's entirely up to you and what your needs are.
That's the cool thing about this is we're trying to take a little dive into this, but yeah, I mean, you could get out there on a lake and just have a rod with a line and a woolly bugger and probably catch some fish, right?
Yeah, you could. Or hang a balanced fly under an indicator, a foot to 2 feet off the bottom, and have a great day. Have a really good day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, well, let's take it out. We're going to take it out here with our shout out session, and today we're going to give a shout out to the Rowley fly rodders. And we had a recent comment from a listener who said that, hey, let's give some shout outs to some of those local groups around the country. And he said the Rowley fly rodders, I'm not sure if this is totally true, but he said it's the oldest local group in the U.S., I guess. like that local fly group. But do you have a local? I'm not sure in your area. Do you kind of have like a local group or that sort of
Oh
thing?
yeah, we've got where I live in the Edmonton area. We've got the Northern Lights Fly Fishers or Northern Lights Trout Unlimited. They're also a chapter of Trout Unlimited
Oh yeah,
Canada
to you
as
right.
well.
Right.
So we have the Northern Lights Fly Fishers down the road in Calgary. We have Hook and Hackle Club. There's a Calgary Women's Fly Fishers, which is great to see. In Red Deer, a friend of mine, he does Red Deer fly tires. I do an annual sort of all-day tying clinic with them on camera, walking them through a wide range and not just lake. We've done big pike streamers, we've done Euro nymphs, we've done a whole pile of things with them. So they're around. And when I lived in British Columbia, I was a member of the Osprey Fly Fishers, based in the Greater Vancouver area. So there's a number of clubs there as well.
There you go.
They're around. They get to find them, and obviously I've spoken to lots across North America as well.
Yeah, great. Well, and let's get. We were talking travel a little bit. I want to hear if you have a couple of things. First of all, do you think you ever get tired of the traveling? Do you love the traveling? Then also, what would be a travel tip you give somebody that's kind of flying, driving around?
Do I get tired of the traveling?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks it's great, to get to Argentina. Well, this time I'm flying from where I live in Alberta to Toronto to Sao Paulo overnight, land in Sao Paulo, Brazil, spend a couple hours there, crawl back on the same plane as I understand it, and then fly off to Buenos Aires. So by the time I get there, I'm pretty well wiped, right?
Yeah.
And, then conceivably you got another 3-hour flight, but usually we take a day in Buenos Aires to acclimatize, get some rest, explore a little bit of the sites around Buenos Aires. So, but overall, like during the show season, it's just a grind. I always joke they don't call it a travel day for nothing, because even a 3-hour flight seems to take all day to get it accomplished with layovers and delays and all those kind of things.
Right.
Travel tips: be efficient, travel light.
Be efficient. I was just gonna say what was my thing was like on the luggage thing, right? How do you avoid them losing your luggage, or do you have any tips there? What do you do?
Well, some airlines. I was last time I went to Argentina, and I've flown United. On the United app, you can look on the app and see the status of your luggage. It tells you, it's been checked in, it's been loaded on the plane, it's now on baggage carousel 7. That's kind of handy. But I know a lot of people more and more are getting those. Apple makes them AirTags.
Yeah.
So you just throw this little quarter-sized thing in your luggage, and it speaks to the Bluetooth of your phone, so you can communicate with your luggage and just know where the heck it is.
Yeah, and they're only they're $30. And the cool thing is like I used it in the whole time, because the last time I traveled, they lost my bag for the whole week, and it was gone. And so, but this, at least you could. And I remember that was a problem we had. Is like they said, "Oh, I think it's in Ohio," and the other person's like, "No, it's in Seattle." And nobody knew where it was.
Yeah, and you're like, how the heck did it get to Seattle? I was going to New York.
Exactly. But so this is a good one. So I love that you came up with the AirTag is a great tip.
Yeah, and I don't like carry-on luggage.
Oh, you don't?
Most of the times I don't want to carry all that stuff. But typically, you've got your one bag that's, I always joke, is predominantly fishing gear and a few pairs of underwear and socks, because you can always try and find a way to get laundry done, either in a hotel or when I go to lodges like Estancia Laguna Verde, they have laundry service every day if you want. You just little laundry hamper, you throw your dirty stuff in there, and then when you get back from the end of the day's fishing, it's neatly folded on your bed. So so you want to make sure you've got the gear you need. And then quite often I will put, if I'm using waders, I've got a little roller carry, your standard carry-on suitcase, that I can get a pair of wading boots, a pair of waders, and a rain jacket in, and that goes in there. But all my rods and reels and flies go in my luggage. I've got like a roller duffel with 2 layers in it that'll hold 10-foot rods for Stillwaters. We like those longer rods, and that everything goes in there, because you can't, particularly in Argentina, for example, you can't take any fly lines, your reels or flies as carry-on. It has to be checked. So when you go to different outside of North America, and even I'm not always convinced everybody in the security world and the great work they do gets the same memo. So some days I've had issues with a fly tying vise, because it's a tool. And if you don't, I have to disassemble it to the point that all the pieces are less than 7 inches. Because if it's a tool over 7 inches, it's not allowed on the plane as carry on. And of course, that's an expensive vise you've got, or just, you got to go check it in. You're in a big, long, it's just I've never had to do that, because do your research and find out what isn't allowed. So that's why I'm very limited on the carry-on, because clothing you can carry on and all that stuff, you're not going to get hung up going through security and find out about something you can't take on the plane, and then that throws a wrinkle into everything. And then I've got my backpack that's got all my, camera gear in it, and GoPros and drones and things I travel with nowadays, or computers, depending on, or little projectors for presentations, those kind of things. I keep the electronics I keep with me because they're delicate. They just can't be bounced around on a luggage rack or in a luggage yard.
That's it. Perfect. Good. Okay. Well, I'm glad we left with the travel because we are traveling. We're going to be heading out, like we said, to the Henry's Lake area. This is going to be happening next year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. We got a good crew going here. We're going to the lodge that we're going at is high level, really great food. It's amazing. So I think the fishing, we're only 20 minutes away from all these great waters. So one last shout out, wetflyswing.com/giveaway. If anybody wants to enter right now to win this big trip, all the gear, that's going to be going on all this week, and it closes up next week. But Phil, we'll send everybody out to the Littoral Zone. Just Google search Littoral Zone on Google, and this will pop up your episodes. We've been having fun there. So until the next one there, thanks for coming on again.
Thanks, Dave. It's always good to talk to you.
That is a wrap. You can grab all of the show notes at wetflyswing.com. And please follow us on Instagram and share this episode out with someone you love. Please send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, if you have any feedback or want us to put together an episode on this podcast for you. Check in anytime. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and would love to meet up with you on the water. We have new fly fishing schools going all year long and all around the country. So if you want to connect, let's do it right now. All right, time to get out of here. I hope you have a great evening. I hope you have a great morning or great afternoon wherever in the world you are. And I appreciate you for stopping by and checking out the show today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.